Let's continue on in Section 8 with our discussion on the steamship lines, but a little bit of perspective on the growth in container ship size. Previously, we talked about the invention of the ocean container and how the first container ship carried about 56 of these retrofitted kind of jury-rigged containers. The growth has been explosive since the 1970s, and we can see that portrayed here. The source of which, as we note in the lower right-hand corner, is the World Shipping Council. The graphic being entitled 50 Years of Container Ship Growth. In 1968, to give some perspective, a ship called the Encounter Bay held 1,530 TEU, those 20-foot equivalency units, or a number of containers, be they 20-footers, 40-footers, 40 high cubes, what have you, that were the equivalent of 1,530 TEU. The progression is clear. In 72, they went up to almost 3,000, 2,950. Let's jump ahead a little bit to 2002. The Charlotte Maersk, owned by Maersk Lines, 8,890 TEU. In 2005, the Gertrude Maersk held 10,000 TEU. In 2012, a considerable jump up to the Marco Polo, which is owned and operated by the French steamship line CMA CGM, at 16,000. Next comes 18,270 TEU in 2013, all the way up to 2018, which are approaching 22,000 TEU. It's not unusual these days to see ships that can carry 18,000 TEU easily. Clearly, the growth has been explosive and a driver of international trade in general and imports into the United States specifically. Let's talk a little bit about what are called Triple E class container ships, an example of which is in our image on the right-hand side. Happens to be a Maersk Line ships, but there are other carriers that have them. A Triple E class vessel can carry 18,000 plus TEU. It's not limited at 18,000, but the Triple E stands for economies of scale, energy efficient, and environmentally improved. To provide further perspective, in our second bullet, a Triple E vessel weighs 165,000 tons and is nearly 400 meters long. That's about 1,200 feet. Third bullet, the ship's draft, or how far it goes down in the water, is 15.5 meters with a top speed of 23 knots. These are big ships, but they can move. Second to the last bullet, these ships are not only longer, they're much wider. In the case of a Triple E, it can accommodate 23 rows of containers, and we can see the rows in our image. Most favorably for the environment, a Triple E ship also emits 20% less carbon dioxide than its predecessor. Pretty big ships, they can carry a lot of cargo. Another way to measure the size of a ship, especially here in the Western Hemisphere, is by the distinction of a Panamax and new Panamax vessel. This is related to the ability to get through the Panama Canal, the size of ships that can get through the Panama Canal. Prior to the widening of the canal in 2016, before the widening of the Panama Canal, last bullet point, a Panamax ship had to be less than or equal to 965 feet in length, 106 feet across, with a draft of 39 feet. Again, the draft is how far down in the water the ship will go. Anyone that has been to the Panama Canal, while an amazing feat of engineering that was completed over 100 years ago, will attest to the fact that the Panama Canal isn't all that wide. In fact, somebody with a good arm could throw a baseball from one side to the other. Things are a little bit different now with the widening of the canal, allowing for longer ships, wider ships with a deeper draft. Before that widening, a container ship, a Panamax vessel, the max size ship that could get through, could hold around 5,000 TEU. To be specific, as we see in our second bullet point, the new Panamax ship can be 1,265 feet long, 160 foot across, with a draft of 50 feet versus 39 as we saw previously. A ship that size can carry up to 13,000 TEU. So more than a doubling of capacity for the type of container ship that can get through the Panama Canal. Last bullet, the expanded canal was inaugurated in June of 2016, and the growth of trade through the Panama Canal has increased substantially, especially for merchandise coming out of Asia, going through the Panama Canal, destined for the Gulf Coast, ports like Houston, for example, and up and down the East Coast from Portland, Maine, all the way down to Miami. Here's a pretty cool graphic that is provided by Alpha Liner, Top 100 from December of 2018. Alpha Liner is a very well-known and respected consultancy that deals with maritime transportation. Anybody can go on their website and download this type of information without charge. These are the top 20 steamship lines worldwide. Let's start at the very beginning, upper left. There are 6,145 active ships in play with almost 23 million TEU. We mentioned a global fleet of more than 20 million. The specific is 22,686,222 TEU in the global fleet, with 276,297,809 DWT. That stands for dead weight tons, size of the ships. Interesting to point out, you'll note here, regional trade weekly capacity in TEU. The transatlantic, that's between the US and Europe, 144,472 TEU in that trade, as it's referred to as. In our training modules, we talk a lot about the Trans-Pacific Eastbound, the TPEB. There's that 485,039. It's the biggest trade by far in terms of global capacity usage by week in the maritime world. And then FEAST, that actually stands for Far East to Europe, 410,000. Not too far behind, but the Trans-Pacific Eastbound, still the largest trade lane in the world. Below that are the size of the ships. And it's important to point out, dark blue is the existing fleet, expressed in TEU, as well as market share. In light blue is the order book, or ships that are on order being constructed and will come into the trade over the next 1, 2 to 3 years. Biggest steamship line in the world, APM Maersk. Over 4 million TEU in play. They have almost an 18% market share. Number 2, Med Shipping, which is headquartered out of Geneva, Switzerland. At 3.3 million TEU, they have about 14.5% of the market share. COSCO, China Ocean Shipping, as it's called, 2.8 million with 12.4%. CMA, that's the French firm we alluded to previously, 2.6 million TEU at about 11.6%. And down we go. Hapag-Lloyd, Evergreen, Zim. It drops off rather dramatically. These are the top 20. There are many more steamship lines around the world. These are the big players. We'll talk more about them in just a second. When we went over our definitions, we talked about conferences, which no longer exist, but also alliances, which definitely exist today. These are cooperatives between steamship lines that, although they're competitors, they help each other out in different trade lanes. Vessel sharing agreements, slot sharing, things we talked about previously. As of today, and you'll note the asterisk in our title, Container Ship Alliances, that just means that these are subject to change, because they do change somewhat frequently, and there's some strange bedfellows floating around out there. As of the production of this module, here's what we have. The 2M Alliance plus HM, which the H stands for Hyundai, but the two big players here are Maersk and Med Shipping, the number 1 and the number 2 steamship lines in the world, as we saw just a moment ago. They represent a large portion, a little over 36% of the total market share. Next up is the Ocean Alliance, which is made up of China COSCO Shipping, the CMA CGM Group, which includes their not-so-recent acquisition of American President Lines. Evergreen is in there. They're out of Taiwan. And Orient Overseas Container Line, also known as OOCL, is part of the Ocean Alliance as well. And then there is the Alliance, THE Alliance. That's made up of Hapag-Lloyd, the Ocean Network Express, or ONE as it's called, which is actually the integration of Mitsui, K-Line, and NYK, Japanese carriers, and then Yangming as well. These are the container ship alliances most influential in the Trans-Pacific eastbound trade, subject to change at any given time. Let's talk about something that we mentioned a few sections back, a supply chain perspective entitled Ocean Carriers and Logistics Services. Because ocean carriers do provide logistics services beyond port-to-port transportation. In the early days of containerized shipping, there were very clear lines of demarcation between the steamship lines and the freight forwarding community. Basically, there was a tacit understanding that the steamship lines contracted directly with very large importers, while the freight forwarders offered NVOCC services to small to medium-sized importers. That was just kind of a given in the Trans-Pacific eastbound trade. Last sentence. Also, the ocean carriers provided the main mode of transport without venturing into forwarding services. Everybody stuck to their knitting. The forwarders / NVOCCs did their thing, offering transportation services as an NVOCC plus other logistics services, and the steamship lines, they just did port-to-port transportation. Clearly, that has changed pretty dramatically. Second paragraph. Over the years, and especially as importers began looking for value-added logistics services, the steamship lines moved into the 3PL services market, the third-party logistics market. Ocean freight forwarding, NVOCC, 3PL, in this context, pretty much all the same thing. As part of that service portfolio, the carriers offer the same services as the forwarders, the 3PLs, including purchase order management, origin consolidation, documentation preparation, and customs clearance, both at origin and destination. The carriers have also gone downstream to offer U.S. services like transload and domestic on-forwarding. This symbiotic relationship between the carriers and ocean freight forwarders continues today, with the clear beneficiary being the beneficial cargo owner. When there's more competition, the BCOs benefit. Back in the day, the steamship lines did their things, the forwarders and NVOs did their things. Now, it's a little bit mixed. It's a symbiotic relationship between the carriers and the NVOCCs. That will wrap up this section. When we come back, we're going to move on from steamship lines to talk about the freight forwarders. That's a very interesting conversation. Do return as soon as you can.